A serial rapist got out of prison this week, but with nowhere to go and no transitional housing available, the plan was to check into a homeless shelter. As Fox 61 political reporter Shelley Sinland tells us, the problem has lawmakers arguing over who is at fault.
52-year-old Ransom Lee Moody is a 3-time convicted rapist, and when he is released from prison Christmas Eve, he will have nowhere to go except for a homeless shelter in New Haven.
They should not be living in a homeless shelter.
Why not just keep them in prison? Why not give them longer sentences?
They should be in prison. They absolutely should be in prison. But they got the sentences that they got.
State Representative Mike Lawler, co-chairman of the legislature's Judiciary Committee, says Moody isn't the only sex offender roaming the streets.
These guys we're talking about got sentenced 10, 15, 20 years ago. And under the rules under which they were sentenced, they have to be released now.
That's why Lawler is pushing to restore funding for a new transitional facility for dangerous sex offenders that was going to be built until the state's money problems set in.
The legislature's already said that this must happen. The governor, as part of her rescissions, stopped this in its tracks. A contractor was selected, a site was selected, work was already underway. It was stopped dead because of the governor's rescissions.
A claim Republican Minority Leader Larry Cafaro calls infuriating.
I'm sick and tired of a supermajority Democrats who flexes their muscles to say we could pass any budget we want, we could veto any bill we want, and then when things go wrong, they say, oh, it's the governor's fault. No one's buying it.
But Lawler says, truth be told, more than 480 sex offenders live within a 2-mile radius of the Capitol Dome alone. And something, he says, needs to be done to keep the public safe from the violent offenders transitioning back into society. According to the state's sex offender registry, 41 sex offenders list this homeless shelter here in Hartford on Sheldon Street as their home address. That's 41 sex offenders, including one who was just released from prison last week.
These guys that I'm talking about are repeat violent offenders, and they're dangerous. And they shouldn't be out roaming the streets living in a homeless shelter.
In Hartford, Shelley Sinland, Fox 61 News at 10.
Representative Mike Lawler joins us now to keep the conversation going. Representative, this is not a new problem, right? I mean, but it seems like we're hearing more about it.
Well, you know, the thing is, people are getting out of prison now. The guys that are sentenced to 10, 20, 30 years in prison years ago are finishing their sentences. And, you know, we anticipated this a couple of years ago in the aftermath of the Cheshire murders. It became clear that important protections had to be put in place to ensure that when people get out of prison, they're adequately supervised, et cetera. So one of the things that we did in January of 2008, almost 2 years ago now, was we required the Department of Corrections and the judicial branch, which runs probation, to come up with a secure bed type facility for sex offenders finishing their sentences. Believe it or not, there was no such beds, and there still are no such beds in our state. And every expert on the front lines will tell you we need these.
Yeah, that's surprising. What is the rate of recidivism? How often are there repeat offenders, I mean, among the sex offenders?
Well, the guys we're talking about here, these very high-risk, violent predators that everybody knows are going to probably offend again, it's pretty high. It's almost a certainty that this is going to happen. And that's why people are very concerned. How are these guys going to be supervised? And just releasing them to homeless shelters is crazy.
Right. So in 2008, you said you made the commitment to this facility, and because of funding problems, we've not been able to do it.
Right. There actually is money in the budget designated for this purpose, and to make a long story short, the Department of Corrections put out to bid a proposal, and they got a contractor to do this. They have a site to do it on Department of Corrections property down in Montville. I think there'll be about 24 offenders would be able to be accommodated there as they finish their prison terms. Unfortunately, the plug was pulled on this, apparently by the governor's office more than a year ago. And what we've been saying is, look, it's not a question whose fault it is. We just want to solve this problem, get this thing open. I know there's a lot of cuts. There's a big budget problem. A lot of things are going to be cut. But this is $2 million a year, and I think everybody in the state would agree this is absolutely necessary.
So is that $2 million a year being used elsewhere, or?
Well, it's part, in the earlier discussion, we were talking about these lapses, right? This money that's being taken back, and this is on that list. So the Department of Corrections, which is directly underneath the governor's office, has stopped this process in its tracks. You know, Judicial, which runs probation, had been working together with them, but it's a DOC site, it's a DOC project, and all we're saying is we don't really care whose fault it is, just get this up and running.
And what's been the response?
Well, the governor's office, I mean, one of the problems is they don't really talk talk to us. They don't really talk to reporters. And so it's a little bit frustrating, but we've made our plea to the governor, please do this. You know, next month, in the middle of January, the Judiciary Committee is going to have some hearings to get updates on all these criminal justice reforms, which were required after the Cheshire murders. We did the same thing about a year ago, and we just want to know how is it going and how is the budget crisis affecting these public safety issues.
Right. I did see a note from one of the governor's spokesmen who said that, you know, it's not in her discretion to tell her departments how to use their money, but it really is, right?
No,
isn't it?
they were saying that this is somehow judicial, and it's worth noting that the governor's actually rescinded a lot of money judicial. In fact, she vetoed a bill that probably would have solved this problem in the first place. But in this particular case, the Department of Corrections took the lead. They own the property. There is a contractor in place who's ready, willing, and able to do this as soon as they get the green light from the governor's office. So my only plea is, Democrats, Republicans, doesn't matter. Let's get this thing open. I am told that if they got the green light tomorrow from the governor's office, this would be up and running by the time the summer begins.
And it would be filled?
There's not that many guys in this category. There's at least two that we know of. One that got released a few days ago, one that was released on Christmas Eve. These guys are dangerous. One of these, the guy that was the subject of these newspaper reports is actually on probation, so he's on round-the-clock GPS monitoring. This other guy who was released in Hartford is not on probation. There is no supervision. He's living in a homeless shelter. This is crazy.
Right, so people should know it's not going to be every sex offender who gets released who would go to these treatment facilities, right? Or
no, only the very high-risk ones who are completing their sentence. And what we know from all the various studies tell us that if there's going to be a reoffense, it's most likely to happen in the few months after these guys leave prison. And so that's why we want to keep an eye on them during this period of time. The Cheshire murders, that was the case. The New Britain murder that happened after that, the guy had just gotten out of jail. So this is the danger zone. These guys are living in homeless shelters. And don't forget, homeless shelter is just at night. It's not during the daytime. It's not fair to the homeless shelter. It's not even fair to the offender. I mean, I don't care about him, but we want them not to commit new crimes and be back in jail if they break any of the rules.
Your #1 priority in this upcoming session?
Well, this seems like an obvious layup, and the legislation's all in place. The governor simply has to call the Commissioner of Corrections and say, let this project go, you can spend the money. And if that were to happen tomorrow, this project would go forward.
All right. Good luck.
Thanks very much, Laura.
Thank you. Thanks again to Representative Mike Lawler for spending some time with us today.